Morning. Thanks everyone for being here today. As stated in the media alert, we have Senior Officer of Finance and Operations, Ibrahim Adil, and Director of Budget Planning and Analysis, Tom. I don't know how to pronounce your last name, so I'm not gonna try. But we're just gonna start off, they're gonna give some brief introductions, and then we will go right into taking questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand, state who you work for, your name, and what your question is, and we will also be taking questions virtually in the chat. So please just put your question in the chat with the same information that I just said, and I will ask the question to them as if you were here. Any questions before we get started? All right, take it away.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We hope that at the end of this press conference that you would have what you need to make your reports that I am hoping would be clear from us and therefore would lead to clear and understandable reports for our community. I'll start by we'll start with the introductions as said earlier. My name is Ibrahim Adil. I am the Chief of Finance and Operations. This is my 8th year in the district. In 23-24, I'll be starting my 29th year in public schools, 25 of them in school finance. And so anything that is fiscal finance, anything that is operations, including the yellow bus that you can see out there, would be under my responsibility, and I work with the team, a large team, to do the things that we need to do.
My name is Tom Retke. I'm the Director of Budget Planning and Analysis for Minneapolis Public Schools. I've been with Minneapolis Public Schools for 4 years, a year in this capacity. Before I came here, I have about 15 years before this of private sector and nonprofit finance experience.
And you have a couple kids in the district.
And I have 2 kids in the district. Yes.
Well, I'll start with the. I'll start with a short remark, and then we'll get to your questions. We first want to express our appreciation and gratitude towards the governor and the legislature for a more realistic funding that we've seen this year and in the years to come. And this appreciation is highlighted in few things here. We would say MPS previously, or Minneapolis Public Schools previously, and now moving forward. Previously, we've talked about this, that the underfunding of special ed and English language learners was a chronic one. We talked about that in any document that we provided pertaining to the budget, be it the pro forma or any answer that we would have provided. Moving forward, starting in 23-24, we're seeing that the funding for both special ed and ELL has moved from 56% to 71%, which is a significant jump. The second piece is the fact that our general education formula was not tied to inflation. What that meant is that we would get our funding, which was based on a formula, and if the inflation was at 2-3%, that wouldn't have been taken into account, which meant in the past that no matter the increase, it was irrelevant once we started the budget because it was eaten up by the inflation. Now the general education formula is tied to inflation up to a level, and I believe it's 3%. The underfunded general education dollars. This year, one of the misunderstanding that existed in this year's budget was that we produced a resolution at first that was in May, and it was published. And then in the second reading of the budget, we changed the resolution, and that's something that caused some misunderstanding. And the reason why we did that is that as a district, we first use our accounting system is on an accrual basis. It's not a cash basis. And what that means is that when we when we know that the revenue is coming, we book it. except that when the revenue is coming, it has to be, if it is with the federal government, they would send us what is called GAN, G-A-N, Grant Award Notification. Until we get that, we cannot put it in our revenues. And if it is with the state, we would have to get a official document from the state that says that this is the share that you will be getting, then we can book it. At the time that we were producing the first resolution, that document, that certainty was not received, because as you may remember, the legislature, the governor, the state were going back and forth to come up with the final bill. And so we needed then to make that adjustment. Once we got certainty as to how much we would receive, we revised our resolution and came up with a new resolution. So that is the underfunding of general education with the additional 31.7 million that we talked about, and additional revenue after 25, 26. We previously had a negative outlook, and that was in 2016. And by 2017-18, we managed to work to move that outlook from negative to stable. And from 2017 to 2018, we've been working hard to making sure that our fiscal standing is stable and healthy. And with that, Fitch, one of the major credit rating agencies around the world, came back and moved our outlook from stable to positive. So that's excellent news for the Minneapolis Public Schools and the Minneapolis community, because that increase in outlook would make it easier on the taxpayers as we would go to when we go on the market to sell bonds. Our fund balance, we've been anticipating this crisis for many years, and when you do that, you start making sure that you budget conservatively. And when I say conservatively, I'm using that term in terms of finance, making sure that we do not squander anything, and any cash that we see at the end, that we set it aside to meet this the challenge that we'll be talking about later on. So in doing that, fund balance was often below the board threshold of 8%. And for the past 4 or 5 years, we've been holding that fund balance to above that threshold, as it is today, 8.2%. And that is money that is there that comes with flexibility, but it is for a one-time use, not relying on fund balance to operate. Audits, as a public entity, when you receive public funds, you get to be audited by an outside auditor. And if you have federal dollars, the same thing, you have a audit that the federal government requires that you go through, so that they can see that the taxpayers' dollars are being used and used wisely. Prior, we had audit reports that had some deficiencies. For the past 7 years, we've had what is deemed by the auditing community as clean audits. And in fact, the audit that we had last year was an audit that had 2 findings. Of the 2 findings, we found one of them, which means that there was 1 finding. And if we're talking about a budget that is close to $1 billion and talking about 2 findings, that's an excellent audit, and it's a clean audit. So that's what we've been having for over the past 7 years. We've been balancing budgets, not relying on fund balance. We haven't been using fund balance to balance the budgets. We've been using, for the past 3 years, ESSER dollars, which are which are federal dollars that all districts across the country received. And pretty much all districts that I know of have been using those ESSER dollars the way we've been using them, which is to cover the deficits or the gaps that we've seen. Our enrollment, as you know, our revenue is predicated on our enrollment, and we've been talking about declining enrollment over the past many years. I'm here to say that as of our count on October our October count. Previously, the past year, we saw about 800 in decline. The year before, about 800. The year before that, it was about 600. This past October, our count showed a 14 student decline, 1-4. So that is sign that our enrollment is stabilizing, which is a good thing. We were facing, and we are still facing an imminent financial crisis, and that is characterized by something that the federal government, a term that was used in 2008 when the era dollars came with President Obama to all districts, and it was said that after these funds would sunset, districts would be facing a fiscal cliff. And so three years ago, we received federal dollars, and that term's been used again across the country to say, well, the fiscal cliff that districts are going to face come 24, 25, because the ESSER dollars are sunsetting in September of 2024, next year. So knowing that, we've been making steps to making sure that we have options, and those options will be seeing them in the next 3 to 5 years. Not next year, not the year after, but maybe 3 to 5 years. We would see that. And when we do, we would be ready, because we haven't been just sitting and waiting for it to happen. We've been working to making sure that we put the district in a position to face that when it arrives, when it comes. We've heard about threats of statutory operating debt. The state is not taking over Minneapolis Public Schools. I repeat, the state of Minnesota will not be taking over Minneapolis Public Schools. And I don't think that that should be anybody's hope or wish, because Minneapolis Public Schools is an institution in Minneapolis. And I don't know that we can function as a city without a fine school district, which we are striving to become. That's the end of my remarks, and so we'll wait on your questions, and hopefully we'll provide you the answers that you expect.
Well, the state would not be taking over Minneapolis public schools if you were in statutory operating debt. That's not what happens, correct? You would just have to give them a plan of action, basically, wouldn't you?
That is even, I think, more complicated than that. We are a special school district, and because of that, we are not under the city. We are not under the state. We are a special school district. We go by state statutes and guidelines, and so if we were to be under statutory operating debt, we would go through way more complicated mechanism before even we'll be talking about a takeover by any other government.
So sorry, I'm Dina Winter from the Minnesota Reformer. When do you project you may hit that threshold? Do you project that next year or beyond? Or do you
We
have
are
to-
not projecting that we would be hitting, Dina, thank you for being here too. And I read your article, so, but I'm saying that we will not be reaching that point, because, that's because, as I said, we've been looking at seeing the crisis coming. We know that, and this is a nationwide phenomenon. It's not only something that is faced by the Minneapolis Public Schools or St. Paul Public Schools. This is something that is faced by every district in the country. What is this? This is a districts that have been characterized by a chronic underfunding, decades of chronic underfunding, and then having people on the sideline saying that, oh, the district would be overtaken. Well, what we've seen is that that is telling us that we would not get there, is part of what I said, what I talked about earlier. We have a school district is characterized by two budgets, expenditure budget and revenue budget. If you are facing and knowing that there would be a tough time coming, you have a choice to sit on your hands. We chose not to. what we decided to do is to go to work to do what? To address both sides of the budget. The revenue side, what do we see with the work that's been done? We're thankful to the governor and to the legislature because we see that we have a revenue budget that is much higher than before. And it is not a one-time funding, but indeed a funding that would be going through forward. So the 31.7 million that we had this year, that would be continuing in the years. The general education formula is tied to inflation. So we're seeing that our revenue is getting to where it should be. So that's on the revenue side. On the expenditure side, we have worked before to reduce our expenditures, and we will be working moving forward to reduce our expenditures. This year, we implemented priority-based budgeting. Why did we do that? We wanted to make sure that we are spending our dollars on programs that are meaningful, that are useful, that are good for our students. If I look at the what we had to this year with priority-based budgeting, we have quite a few programs that, in numbers, are tied to the strategic plan. And so that is a new way of budgeting and making sure that we use our dollars according to the strategic plan that we have. This year's budget, 107 programs are aligned to the strategic plan with goal 1, academic achievement. 50 programs aligned to goal 2. 27 programs aligned to goal 3, effective staff. 57 programs aligned to goal 4, school and district climate. So this is the first. This is an indication that we are doing what we are supposed to do as a district to position the district in a place that would make us face any crisis and be better after that crisis.
I think that people often will look at our pro forma, right, that shows us if we do nothing going into statutory operating debt. But it's important to understand that when we do those pro formas, we're doing that projection in order to see what the future is going to bring if we do nothing, right? But we don't just, as you said, we don't just sit on our hands and do nothing. It allows us to identify areas to adjust and to prepare.
Dave Perrine from North News. I wanted to ask about 24-25. What is the picture you face for that school year, the deficit, and what are some of the things that the district has to do to meet that challenge?
Thank you, Dave. I'll answer in Tom if you can chime in. 24-25, we did say that the ESSER dollars, the federal dollars, would be sunsetting in September of 2024. That means that in 24-25, we would be budgeting without the ESSER dollars. If you look at the resolution that was presented to the board, and the board approved it unanimously actually on June 13th, we did say that we're using 92 million from from ESSER dollars to balance the budget this year. That means that by that time, 24-25, that 92 million will not be here. We do know that we have additional dollars coming, part of the omnibus bill. We have additional dollars that would be coming to the district at that time. So that would be reducing that 92 million. We also feel that with the increase in the general formula and the increase in revenue that we see, that 92 would be reduced to a manageable number. What I mean by manageable number is anywhere between 50 and 60 million. And when we're talking about a budget of 755 general fund budget, because I'm not including here the capital dollars, so the general fund dollars are 755 million. 60 million, 80 million is about 8 to 10%. So it is not a huge number that we cannot surmount. I would also have to say that since I joined the district, there is not a budget year that we didn't start with the gap. And that is a distinction that I want to make. We don't have deficits, we have gaps. And the gap is something that is normal. You find it in households. If you have a revenue and you see that your expenses are high before you put your budget, you have a gap. And our goal always has been to making sure that we have a balanced budget that we present to the board for their approval. So we would go to work as we've done before to reduce expenses, to making sure that at the end, by the time we go to the board on May 2024, that the budget is balanced and is balanced hopefully not by using fund balance, because fund balance has a role to play for the stability of the district today and tomorrow. So we see that it would be a critical year, but we've worked all these years to set the district in a position to facing that 24-25 budget. And so, as we've done in years past, we've closed those gaps. We've seen them just this year. At the beginning, the gap was about 70 million, and we were able to close it. So we'll do just that again.
Yeah, I think the other thing to keep in mind is that during the pandemic, there was a labor shortage that was a lot of employers were facing. It hit school districts especially hard. It was not good for us because we would have liked those people to be here with our students. But the silver lining of that is that we did have some savings related to those open positions. And instead of turning around and spending a lot of that money on other things, it's accumulated into our fund balance. And what that means is that we have plenty of cash on hand, if to weather a change in our revenue.
Melissa Whitler, Minneapolis Schools Voices. So, all right. So you've got 92 million in ESSER that's in fiscal year 24 budget. So 24, 25, that's fiscal year 25, right? You have about 20 million more coming in from the state. So how do you get that to 50 to 60 million?
Okay, let me go back. The 92 million is not for 25. It would be for fiscal year 23-24.
Right. So okay.
So
Yep.
2025, we're saying that we talked about the added revenue that we're getting, which should be carrying over.
Yep.
We talked about the additional funding, which may be 20 million, but it may be less than 20 million, and whatever that number is. And we talked about the cash. Last year, when the audit report came, it is something that threw many people off, because on the one hand, the pro forma was saying that we are short in cash. And on the other, the report is saying that we have a healthy cash balance.
Yep.
That healthy cash balance is the result of what Tom talked about. We have vacancies in any given year. We would run a vacancy of 5 to 7%. During the pandemic, we've seen vacancies that were close to 25-30%. So throughout that time, the cash that should have gone to pay for these employees that we would have loved to have had, that amount has been sitting, and we kept it in reserve as a cash balance. So that would be used to reduce that 92 to a level that is really, really manageable.
So is that what's currently in the assigned fund balance?
In the assigned fund balance, we have.
Where is the-
Yes, we're putting most of those funds in assigned fund balance. The unassigned fund balance is where our bond rating is tied, and that stands at 8.2, which is above the board's threshold. The assigned fund balance, we've been putting money there because the money was for something, and that not happening because of the labor shortages. We kept the money there. So moving forward, we would be obligating those funds to taking care of to lowering the gap to a manageable level. And then after that, we'll look at our expenditures, just like any school district, any household does, to see what works and what doesn't. We have a formidable research department that will be going through all the investments or all the programs that we've had over the past 3-5 years, looking at what is working and what is not. Those things that we deem by were deemed by our experts that they are not moving the needle on our kids, we would sunset them to reallocate those dollars. By doing that, we will be closing the gap.
So, so on the revenue side, you expect that you're losing some one-time money, it gets replaced with some additional state money. And that, I mean, you're saying it's 50 to 60, I don't quite understand how it's not 70, but I'll take your number. But then my question is, what will happen on the expense side? So yeah, so do you have like you project 20 million more in revenue, what do you expect expenses to go up by?
Yeah, and the expenses, we know that we have inflation right now, pretty high level of inflation nationwide. So we know that our cost of operating is much higher now than it was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So we're dealing with that. But as we said earlier, we have two budgets, revenue and expenditure. The revenue is getting better. The only way to get a expenditure budget better is by reducing it. So we'll be working to reduce our expenditures.
So the school board talked about, I mean, obviously, most of your money goes to paying teachers. And the school board has talked about closing schools as though that is going to happen. So it seems like you're gonna probably be looking at closing schools. And maybe, do you think layoffs will be necessary?
On your first question, I don't think that that's what we're here today for, closing schools. That's not for us. That's something that the board would decide. I'll go then to your second question. Layoff. We are a people-intensive business. School districts are known to be spending, most of our expenditures are made up of salaries and fringes. 80+ % of our budget is about salaries and fringes. So that means that if we are making a expenditure reduction, it would be a combination of two things: reducing our workforce to meet the requirements, but not only that, we would have to cut costs elsewhere to making sure that expenditures in general are at a manageable level.
Have you made any estimates of how many teachers would have to be laid off, for example, to balance the budget?
No, we have not, because we'll be starting our budget process later this fall, and if that is something that would be needed, then it would be communicated openly to staff and to the community. But that is again, I want to make it clear that we are not saying that we are going to lay off people and that's it. No, that would be too easy and too lazy. I would say that what we would be doing, we have to be very thoughtful in what we do. Running a school district is not like running a corner store, right? We have to look at what the impact of our actions, our decisions are today and tomorrow. And in doing that, we cannot just say that we'll do this and that's the end of things. No, we will say that we would approach it with intelligence, with a strategic mind, to making sure that we reduce our expenditures. And that reduction of expenditures will impact salaries and fringes. It would also impact other things. One example that I can give you about other things: if you look at the resolution that we had on June 13th, there is a section for items that are approved by the board, and it has many contracts. The cabinet will be going through and looking at all the contracts that each department has. And we will see how we can reduce those significantly to help reduce the expenditures as we move forward.
Okay, so if 80% of operating expenses are labor costs, right? So that leaves you 20% that's not labor. And you have 8 to 10% of your budget that you have to cut. I mean, you're gonna cut your contracts in half. Like a lot of the contractual stuff is necessary, right? It's like transportation, it's food, it's.
So It's important to remember that, especially this labor shortage has exacerbated our contract costs, right? In many cases, it's more expensive to use a contractor than to hire an employee yourself. And that's true of most of our support positions like food service and transportation. And I mean, I'd also add, and I think, Senior Officer Diab said this just a minute ago, is that, future district is likely going to have fewer people in it. That's how you reduce those expenses.
You mentioned priority-based budgeting. How is that different from past years, past boards, administrations, and like, how does that improve the situation? Like, just trying to understand, I would think budgeting, we would budget for priorities. It's obviously something different here from what you're saying.
Yes, priority-based budgeting. Previously, we've done what in school districts is called a classical way of budgeting, which is looking at what was budgeted last year and adding in inflation and pretty much doing the same thing as you go. And when you do that, sometimes you lose fact that, what happened to the funding, the programs that you funded previously? Are they working? And that kind of questioning does not come into the process. With priority-based budgeting, since we now have a strategic plan, it just made sense to reflect the strategic plan on the budget. And the way to do that would be to do priority-based budgeting. What we did was to create a committee, which is a budget committee, and then required every department to come in. And again, it was something that this was the first year of implementation. We only limited it to central office schools who were not subjected to that. Right? They were not covered to be a priority-based budgeting. We asked all departments, including my department, to come in before this budget committee and justify the programs that we needed. Prior, departments would come and say, I need 5 million or I need 6 million. This time we did say, no, it's not about money. It's about the programs that you think you need to do to meet student needs. So each department came in and said that these are the programs that I needed to do. And then we went to questioning, to making sure that they are tied to the strategic plan. Only after that did we allocate the dollars. And then we drafted a document that showed the board and the public as to how these programs that were approved by this budget committee, how they align with the strategic plan. There are, in that process, we saw instances where two things were being done in two different departments for the same goal. That was then an opportunity for us to say we cannot be funding one program in 2 or 3 different areas. We'll do it in one area and then make sure that it works. We've seen instances where budgets were money was allocated for something, and at that, when the question was asked, did it work? We didn't get a concrete response. So it was a way then, a time to switch that and put it in an account that we know would be helpful to our students and community.
So did you have examples of things that departments let go of, or was it mostly found with the redundancies?
Yeah, professional development would be one of those. We have professional development that would be in one department. We would see professional development that is in a different department. Now we said that we'll have one professional development that would be district-wide. It would be easier and more transparent to manage.
I have a question about, so the ESSER dollars, about 92 million for 23-24. I don't know if you could talk through exactly how that money is being used. I know YES has a site with many different areas where this money is going. And when you say 92 million going to prop up the budget, I'm trying to understand if there's if there are new programs specifically or equipment specifically to address pandemic problems that were created and that this money is being used for, or if this is like going to the cross subsidy in kind of broad picture, can you help me understand?
I would start and Tom would take the second part of that question. I would say, no, first of all, no, it is not used for subsidy. It is used for, we have the 29 million that was the learning loss because 20% of ESSER dollars was, is by federal guidelines supposed to be used for learning loss. So 29 million is going to those triads that the superintendent had talked about in previous board meetings and the board approved. And so that would be in this coming school year. And we have quite a few one-time expenditures in that 92 million. Tom, you have
No, I mean, you know, when you ask about new programs, it's those intervention teams is our big program for next year. That's $30 million that we're hoping is successful. Aside from that, we're essentially using the more general, lesser $3 to just plug the budget gap.
Thanks. I just want to go back to the enrollment numbers. So this declined by 14, which is really remarkable compared to other years. Is that the count from October 2022? I want to make sure I got that right.
Yeah, so the 14, I'm gonna walk that back. That was a slightly different number. We ended fiscal year 22 at just about 28,456 students. And we are currently at 28,087. So year over year, we've lost students. We've lost about half as many as we anticipated in our budget. But through the year, kind of the exciting thing for us is that in normal years, we've seen enrollment drop throughout the year by 600 to 800 kids. So you start the year with 28,000, you end the year with 27,200. This year, we're actually seeing enrollment not just hold steady, but we've actually seen an increase in the number of kids who are attending our schools. So we're using that enrollment for the year.
This might not be your department, but I'm just curious. How do you know what's driving that?
So what we're seeing is that we're seeing an increase in Spanish language students who are in Spanish language families.
Historically, when you have seen an influx of newcomer students, is that enrollment stable? Do they tend to stay in the city? Or do you tend to see that they come into the city and then? Or I guess, is that different than like the existing pool of students?
So I think that we'd have to look into that more and I can get back to you. Yeah, I'll get back to you.
the one thing about the declining enrollment that for a long time we thought that it was the reason for that was something different. Past 2 years we came to realize that the driving force in the school student decline is twofold. The first one is how expensive it is to live in Minneapolis. Many families are moving out of Minneapolis, and as they do, they move with their children, and so we're seeing that. The second one is violence. That we've seen families move out of Minneapolis because of violence, and so those are the two reasons as to why we're getting declining enrollment, along with a significant decline in birth rate. That is, the demographers have noticed that in Minneapolis, that the birth rate in Minneapolis is declining. And then you factor in how expensive it is to live in Minneapolis and the perceived lack of safety.
So when you say that, like, you've concluded these are the reasons, is that because, like, has there been a survey? Is that what you hear, like, parents call, they say, we're not coming back next year, and the reason is because?
I believe
How
that was
expensive.
through a survey that was shared with us by our research department 2 years ago.
It was done by whom?
Well, our research department.
2 years ago.
Yeah, and when you look at the census data for Minneapolis, you can see the decrease in the number of children living in the city.
I wonder if you could talk through your the budget process for this next year, as you're facing cuts and trying to make hard decisions, when you might expect to make recommendations on things to the board for cut expenditures.
Our budget process starts usually in November. We start with the revenue projections in September, October, and by December we are waiting for the board's priorities to be provided. And the budget process itself, the mechanics of it would start in January, mid-January, all the way to when the board approves it. So the recommendations would follow the same timeline. We would be, by the time we go to the board, the finance committee in April, we would have a budget that is balanced, which would have all the recommendations on, because that finance committee would move that to the full board in May for the first reading, and then in June for the second and final reading. And you can find a copy of our timeline on our website for the current year. Next year will be pretty much the same.
So one of the findings that I wrote for Mo was that Minneapolis Public Schools spends more per student in relation to some other districts. Can you talk generally about why that is? I know you're not one of that's been full district.
I mean, the short answer is that we have capacity spread across the city that's really built to house a population of 40 to 45,000 students. And what that means is that we have very low student to teacher ratios compared to the state average. So if you look at the state average for licensed personnel, or number of students per licensed personnel, it's something like 12 or 13. For us, it's less than 10. And that's just, as you're trying to provide the same service across the city, you just need more people often to do that.
So kind of following up on that then, so is that part of where savings from consolidating schools would come from? Is that like you're moving to, if you go from having 300 kids in a building to 400 kids in a building or 500 kids in a building, you see more in suburban districts, like you just save on staffing?
You see economies of scale, in not just education, right? Economies of scale across the economy, and if you can definitely, if you can increase the number of students per licensed staff member, that's going to drive savings.
So I think like for the small school subsidy, it's been like 250 students or less is considered small, and so there's some, small amount of money that goes to subsidizing that, right? And then I think there are some other buildings that it's like, I think it's targeted ESSER, right? That it's to meet predictable staffing in those buildings. So like by reducing the number of buildings, that there would be savings there, but do you think it would be beyond just that?
I think that the conversation about we will be definitely looking for efficiencies, but I wanted to make sure that we keep the closing buildings and all, because that is not what we're here today to respond, because that is a prerogative that sits with the board and the superintendent. And so we do know that we would need to reduce. The future district would be one that would have less staff members than we do now, and we'll make sure that we look for efficiencies and economies of scales that Tom talked about throughout the process to arrive at a budget that is sustainable, allowing Minneapolis Public Schools to be spending more time on academics and less time on finance.
It seems like you've got a lot fewer students but you still have a lot of buildings and staff, while enrollment's been going down. And I think you maybe have even added staff at time and kept your footprint, which does not seem advisable. So it feels a little bit like you guys are like on paper and your pro forma and stuff saying, hey, we got to do something or it's gonna be really bad. And then it's up to the school board to do those things. And they're not doing those things. So,
Well, I would say that the pro forma before came out, and we've been saying these things, by the way, for many, many years. We, the finance office has, and administration has. One thing that is encouraging this time around is that the pro forma was taken to heart this time. You're talking about it. The board members have been talking about it. Everybody took it seriously. And we do feel that with that, when the time to do things, to do something arrives, that it will be done because people understand what we said in the pro forma. And by the way, about the pro forma, that just shows what we do, how transparent we are. That is something that I wanted to address too, because since I joined the district, I made sure I did say that this would be my 29th year in public schools and 25 in school finance. I've seen one thing or two about finance, public school finance, and finance in general. And so one thing that I found, that I noticed, was that we needed to be more transparent, and we did that. We provide financial statements to the board at the finance committee, and this is open to anyone in the community to attend. Not only that, we provide a pro forma. The pro forma is not a required document. We are willingly putting that out to say to the community, this is what we see in the next 5 years. Unless we sit on our hands, we would be hitting the wall. And so we haven't been sitting on our hands. We've been working to making sure that when that crisis hits, we would be ready to face it. That's what we've been doing. And in terms of transparency, we didn't get the awards that we received over the past 3-4 years if we didn't do anything. We've got the Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting. That is from the Association of School Business Official International, ASBO. Those are our peers. From the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada, we receive an award for best practices in school budgeting. We've had many awards from the State Department of Education, MDE, in terms of school finance. So I'm saying all these things to say that the pro forma is a great document, and is a document that came out of courage, moral courage by the district to say, let's share what we know with the public, and also follow it with the public by saying that these are the things that we would be doing to avoid what the pro forma stated. That's the goal of that.
but it seems like the logical time to start closing schools would have been during the reorganization of 2020. Like, that's when, isn't that when a lot of school districts do that? Like, but it didn't happen. So
Well,
now,
in 2020, when we were talking about you're referring, I believe, to the CDD, the Comprehensive District-Wide Assessment. That the goal of that process was not to close schools. The goal of that process was to make sure that we align our resources to our goals, and making sure that we set the district to a position to a place where no matter what comes, we would be able to face it. And if that would have required closing schools, I'm sure we would have talked about that then.
We have a question in the chat from Abby. Thank you for providing this excellent explanation. Is it possible to discuss the $4 million gap between expenses and revenue in the food service fund, and how is this being addressed?
Sure. So, and it's simply because of the operations of our food service are spread across the city. We have as many facilities as we do. We have to make sure that we provide, we have kitchens up and running, and we're providing healthy meals to the kids in those buildings. So it does end up costing us more. And what we have to do is at the end of the year, we have to transfer whatever amount of money is necessary from the general fund to the food service fund in order to offset that gap.
will the state's free meals help with that?
It will help with that. So the $4 million deficit that we are projecting in the food service fund would be worse if it were not for the universal meals. legislation.
Last question.
I mean, I don't know, maybe this is not a correct assumption, but I think that people in Minneapolis that I talk to are very supportive of public schools. Right, it's, like, I think that if you ask people that, they would say they support public education. So, I'm wondering if you can kind of, in plain language, explain why it is that if the district is operating, it has this footprint, why can't you just raise taxes? Why can't you just raise the levy and close the gap that way? Why doesn't it work that way?
I agree with you that people in Minneapolis are very supportive of public education, and we thank them for that. We are full of gratitude towards them for that. I live in Minneapolis, and my kids go to Minneapolis public schools, and I pay taxes that come here, and I'm proud of that. The levy, we have levy limitations. That is something that we have no control over. One thing that we have control over is if after we, in July, the team would be now looking at the state website to see what the levy would be. We would get to a level where we would know what the maximum levy would be. We've made a recommendation to this board and the previous board saying that whatever the levy is, approve it to the max, to making sure that we don't leave any money on the table. So that's something that we would continue doing, and we don't know what the levy percentage increase would be next year, but whatever it is, we'll approve the max on that.
So just to clarify, that's state regulation that limits what the school district can raise from property taxpayers in Minneapolis.
Yes.
Yeah, it's state law, so voters can only approve a referendum up to a certain point. They've done that for us.
And to understanding how the Minneapolis community is supportive of the district is why we've been working very hard to take care of our fund balance, to take care of our bond rating, because when we go on the market to sell bond, we've been selling those bonds at a premium, which is a break on our taxpayers. If we needed $100 million, we would not go to sell 100 million, which would be at a par. We would sell it at a discount, not a discount, but at a premium, which means that we would sell maybe 85 to 90 million, and the proceeds would come and tap 100 plus million. So that is the reason why we're doing the things that we're doing in a way that is very wise, and making sure that we ground our decisions on facts. And anything that we do, there is not a time that we've made a decision, whether in my office or in cabinet or anywhere, where we did not have our students and community in mind, or any decision we make. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, guys, and thanks for being here, everyone. We're gonna wrap this up now.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for coming. And if you need more information, our website has them, or you can contact our communications office here with Christina, and she would point you out to lead you to where you would find the information that you may need. And we're here. Any questions that we have, we'll make sure to give you the answers that you need. Thank you.
Thank you.